in your listeners right now, fair chance somebody's thinking of a manuscript or working on a literary project. And I would say, don't try to have it all perfectly laid out in your head before you actually start moving on it. Start moving and get after it. And, it'll just only comb itself into place better and better if you can start out with something on the page. So let go of your inhibitions a little bit, try to move forward on it a little bit. There's way too many people out there eager to help out to just let some cool idea sit in the back of your brain unused. So let it out.
You're listening to Alan Small, a biology teacher and children's book author from Fort Worth, Texas, discussing his latest writing project, Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum. He's our guest today on the podcast. Alan, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Randy. I'm really excited to be here.
And Alan, how's the weather today out in Fort Worth, Texas?
Actually, today it is really, really rainy and stormy. So I'm hoping that all the power stays smooth for us as we visit. I think it will, but we're woken up between 4 and 5 with some monstrous thunder and lightning, which is always fun. I've learned not to complain about rain here in Texas. We'll take all that we can get.
Oh, wow. Yeah, morning thunderstorms. That's interesting.
Yeah, we've been getting good rain so far, and I'm thankful for it. We had a large drought a couple of years ago that really lasted on, and so I decided that anytime we get rain, I'm not going to act irritated about it. I'll be pleased to have every drop that falls.
Sure, and the fact that there is the lightning storm, it kind of dovetails into our conversation that we're going to be having here today.
Good. Don't you like when nature helps you out like that?
Exactly. We're all on the same page here. So, Alan, before we get started, I just want to say thank you for being on the show today.
You are very welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity. When I saw that opportunity to join and visit with you, I got really pumped because I always like to visit and connect with people who are helping to be the connectors between groups, especially writing groups. And I'm just so thankful for the work that you're doing in this space.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you're a biology teacher and a science club organizer for STEM activities. How did you get started being interested in science?
I've been incredibly blessed, incredibly fortunate, and I can blame my parents. When I was 3, our local science and history museum, which has had kind of been a motivating factor in my life, I'd say, the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History had a museum school program, and my parents signed me up at 3, and then they kept bringing me back. And it was such a popular program. It's the sort that parents have to spend the night in the lawn chairs in the parking lot the night before. But they did that all the way from 3 years old up until 6th grade when you're too old for that program. And in the 6th grade, my mother lied, and she said that I failed 6th grade and I needed to be signed up for one more year. I didn't fail 6th grade, but I was happy for that little bit of disingenuity, because as soon as that second 6th grade year was over, they invited me to come take a job as a classroom assistant. And so at 14, I stepped into the classroom and worked my way through all sorts of fun classes. I got to see some wonderful lessons modeled by some absolutely phenomenal educators over the years. And I worked at the museum for many years. There was a brief moment where I had worked there more than half my life. So I'm always thankful for those times. But having spent so much time watching cool science happen with cool instructors, I can't help but be attracted to it now.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice story. Half your life involved with science. It sounds like now it's even become 100% of your life.
It really has. I've gotten to take that into the regular classroom. I've taught at mostly elementary, but I've also taught middle and high school, and I love each one of those areas of science. But my current role is a stream coordinator, which means different things to different people. But it's a STEM coordinator that works along libraries in our school district, and we do course, regular STEM content in all four of those areas, but we also integrate coding as one of our core curriculum areas. And it's my job to help get that done. So I really have enjoyed working through the libraries and in that space, and it's given me a chance to play around with books as much as I play around with science, and I'm so thankful to be able to live this life.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who may not be aware, what is STEM exactly?
So STEM is one of those funny terms that means different things to different people. Generally, it's an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. So a lot of times when people hear that, they'll go straight to robots or robotics. But really, it's the word is recognizing that all four of those areas are different sides of the same thing. To be successful in science, you've got to have the ability to think through mathematically, even if not numerically. You've got to be able to at least construct ideas as an engineer, and it's super helpful to think of it as a scientist. So if a person starts to mesh those four ideas into one discipline of inquiry and perseverance, they can use STEM as a good acronym to keep them moving. As the years pass, different content areas kind of join in, tag team in. There's STEM. You might hear STEAM, which is the first four with art added in. And then my acronym, which my science buddies giggle at, is STREAM. And that R would be reading, because I work in the library space. So my science buddies, they giggle at STREAM, and my library buddies are all very excited about it, because that's the libraries and the readers embracing STEM and STEAM. So it's a cool amalgamation of different content areas that gets kids out exploring the world, in my mind.
Yeah, that's a really good cause. In fact, I was actually an engineering major at Penn State growing up, so I have been familiar with the STEM initiative for a long time, and I think it's really great to get students involved in those areas.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a lot of fun too. Part of my role is helping teachers and educators, librarians, find those areas where what they already like to do or what they're already interested in will mesh easily and with interesting ways with STEM. And so, if you hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't like science," or "I don't like math," what they're really saying is, "I haven't figured out a useful way to chase what I'm interested in using science or math." And I understand that. I've been churning through the episodes with the cool people you've had on. One that I just had to jot down is when Meg Bronson, she mentioned that it drives her nuts whenever somebody says that they're bad at art. Because in her words, you really can't. If you're creating something, that's your art. That's showing what you've got. And I feel the exact same way about science. It drives me nuts when somebody says, "I'm no good at science." And if I hear a kid say that, it means they have not done science. They may have read about it. They may have had some teacher preach about it too much, but they have not put their hands in the mud, or they've not looked for fossils, or they've not built the roller coaster. And so I'm trying desperately to get those materials into the kids' hands so that they understand they don't hate science. They hate being bored while people talk about science.
Good way to look at it. Yeah, it's a good point from Meg as well. So, and also I really wanted to say that I like how you're kind of mixing the STEAM and the STREAM and bringing art and reading and writing into the mix, because even though they kind of live on two sides of the equation, both, I believe, are necessary in the education of kind of the standard education model.
Yes, there's too many walls in education. My science teachers and my art teachers, they think that they're in opposition to each other, but you can't find somebody who's successful in one without them having some success in the other. If you think of any cool artist who really created something wonderful, if they're creating a marble sculpture, well, they've got to have at least a moderate amount of geology to understand the rock they're working with, or if somebody's going to be using cool paints or inventing cool colors. you can't avoid chemistry. And it's the same with science. If you're going to have, true, interesting, engaging science content, you're kind of an artist about using your resources and being creative with the way you let kids use them. So those two disciplines are not in opposition. And I love every time I see somebody kind of break down the walls and dive in together on those two subjects.
Absolutely. That's it's a powerful statement, and I'm hoping that things can kind of go in that direction.
For sure.
Okay, so how did you come up with the idea for Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum?
This book is one of several that I have been coaxing and brushing into place, and it has been the first of my picture books to the finish line, and it actually has its roots from long ago. My wife and I met working at the Science and History Museum, and I'll give you half a guess what my wife's name is. Jessie Marie is my wife's name, and this is I decided to use her as this character because years ago when I originally wrote this, it was not supposed to be for the whole world. It was supposed to be for my wife. And the genesis of this story, with us both having worked in that informal science space, was that I had gone out on a trip alone and gone out deer hunting, which I think it's only hunting if there's any success. I think I was more deer sitting in the woods. But as I sat out there, I saw a beaver swimming by and doing its beavery thing, and then something startled it, and it made a huge noise when it slapped its tail in the water. And I was just really struck by how cool it was. And then I also was, really wishing that she was there. But then I realized that her busy week was keeping her from it. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in the woods thinking through all these things. And this story just started like pouring into my brain. It was definitely a pantser moment that I was unprepared for. So I was able to sit out there for an hour or two. And then I had to just jump up and run back to the truck and like take all my notes. And so I honed it into place at that time long ago and assembled just small one-off books just as gifts. But over time, people have looked at it and loved it and been engaged with that story. And so as I've been growing these other projects, it's kind of risen back to the surface. And with encouragement from folks that are around me, it's made sense to take that story, modify it, and polish it, and adjust it to actually join the market. And so that's how it came to be.
So Alan, growing up, were you always into creative writing, or did it develop later on?
I did have some roots early on. I have polished it as an adult, but I do reach back to an instance in early childhood, early, probably third grade-ish, second or third grade. And one of our tasks as a student was, copy our spelling words so many different times, probably 2 or 3 different times. And my mother, who she loves to write creatively, she couldn't figure out what the assignment was at that moment. And so she told me, just to make sure our bases were covered, she was going to have me write my spelling words some very unreasonable amount of time, probably like 4 times instead of 3 times or something. And in my indignation, I penned a very persuasive and very motivating letter to her about all the evils and ills of trying to make somebody overdo their spelling homework. And she's always giggled at that letter because it was full of evidence of why I should be practicing my spelling. And that's kind of a genesis of, me as a writer. I've always enjoyed reading, always enjoyed books. But kind of at that moment, I felt spurred to use writing as a tool or a lever. I was also lucky enough that my parents early on gave me a journal or a diary to kind of keep track of things. And I wasn't always consistent, but the things that I have written into it have always struck me as kind of powerful, as kind of reaching back through time to different times and places. And so I have had good support in writing, and it's just been a lot of fun to work with as an adult.
Excellent. And as a kid, did you have any authors or stories that you admired?
I did have a few. When I was younger, I absolutely lived and died by the Hardy Boys
Hmm.
and Frank and Joe Hardy. I could just churn through those. Absolutely loved them. And we had I would go sit summers at my mother's office, and right next door there was a used bookstore, and she would go take me down there, and we'd buy stacks of Hardy Boys, and I'd burn through them. But she could afford it because the used book prices, you can get a stack of them. And then alongside of those, I don't know how or why I developed the addiction, but I became just committed to Reader's Digest. And it was I haven't picked up a Reader's Digest in a long time, but the Reader's Digest of the '80s were wonderful because they were just full of all sorts of cool stories, some long, some short. I thought it was really funny, and there were sections I'd be drawn to. But I think those two, Reader's Digest and Hardy Boys, have made some real impact on my love of reading.
Yeah, I actually was into the Hardy Boys as well. So, Alan, tell me about your writing routine. Do you like to write in coffee shops or quiet living room? How do you like to write?
I need a quiet space. I have tried coffee shops, and if I am going to set up in a coffee shop, I'll probably hook up headphones and get on a YouTube hour-long loop of white noise just to block it all out. But my favorite way to do it is I get up. I don't manage it every morning, but on a perfect day, I get up at 4 in the morning, and I can sit in the quiet. I can wake up slow with my cup of coffee, and then I can start writing creatively. There's some times where I'm actively going towards a goal on a writing project, and then there's sometimes where I'm just riding the waves and writing what's coming to me. And both have had some pretty good results as I've used that time. So, but 4 in the morning, from 4 to 6:30, if I could have my preference every morning, 4 to 6:30 with some good coffee and a quiet house would be a perfect writing space for me.
Yeah, that does sound like a perfect writing space. So, Alan, what inspires you to continue writing?
There's sometimes I'm trying to write a certain thing for a certain group. For example, a project that I'm working on right now is a story about rocks and about a story of a girl who develops a love of rocks, like I have. And so in that story, I'm thinking of my audience, but this book is paired with the things that I have seen in science classes working with rocks. So I do these science classes, I pass out rocks, and I share rock collections and that sort of thing. And kids start to have these common expectations or questions or things that interest them. And so plugging those in to a story means that I'm aiming for that reader. And so that's one way that I find motivation. But the other way that I find motivation, which is my favorite because it's the more rare and fleeting, is when something all of a sudden starts growing and I can't hardly contain it until finally I have to barf it out on the page. And I've had that happen a couple of times, and my mother calls it when the muse strikes. But Jessie Marie was an example of that. The Science Club Handbook was an example of that. That kind of came out of me working with lesson plans and sending instructions out to my staff on how to manage their science clubs. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, if I tweak this, poke that, and finish out this section, this is really going to work out. And I couldn't quit till I had that together. So the muse has struck a couple times. I wish I could get it to strike more often, but it's definitely my favorite way to go.
Yeah, the muse. That's a good way to put it. When you're out in the woods and you have this story of Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum, just download right in.
It just plugged right in.
So let's talk about Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum. Tell me about the premise of the book. What is it all about?
So in this story, there's the main character, Jessie Marie. She's totally committed to working in this area of informal science, which is, what you would see in a science museum. And that's a wonderful space because kids can, and adults, are free to gravitate towards what interests them. There's not a grading or a rubric that tells them good job, bad job, you're good at this, you're bad at that. And so it's a free-flowing space where people can be biologists, then geologists, all in one day. And she really loves it. But she reaches a point in the story where, in spite of her love of it, she's just having some overwhelming experiences with guests, nobody being overly oppressive. It's just the noise has started to get to her, and she starts to hunt for different ways to solve the too much noise problem that she's got. And so the story's got a good collection of different strategies that she tries in the museum, but ultimately she has to take a break, head to the woods, clear her head, and come up with a solution there. Except the woods comes with its own set of problems that she has to reconcile. So it's a fun story. It was fun to write. It's fun to read to kids because she has to come up with two different versions of a resolution to take care of herself while she's still taking care of the people that she loves working with. But she does ultimately find a solution, of self-care and taking care of her own well-being.
Yeah, that sounds like a good message. So, Alan, how would you describe your typical reader out there? What is their age group?
If we push myself away from my adult readers, which I also love, my first book, the Science Club Handbook, was definitely directed at teachers and educators and parents. But the picture books, specifically Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum, they're targeted towards pre-K to fifth. So it's aimed at an elementary audience. And a lot of pre-K students are actually better scientists than some of the older students because they're still free to investigate without inhibition. So I target these stories towards that age group. I have noticed that adults who know this age group, whether it's parents or teachers, they also are drawn to the stories because they recognize the connections that they help kids make to love science. One thing that kind of snuck up on me with Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum is I wish that I was smart enough in the beginning to have thought this up, but I just lucked into it, was having a story that shows girls a role model of women working in STEM. And I didn't set out with that as a goal, but in the end, I've ended up with a story of a woman who loves working at her museum, loves being an educator in the STEM field and in multiple areas, and it's totally cool, and she likes it. And so that's been fun for girls to connect with and see a path towards STEM careers, and I've enjoyed that because I see the value in that. And I'm just lucky enough to be holding the book, that can do that. But that was just a lucky break for me.
Absolutely. And tell me about your illustrator, Mike Quinones.
Yeah, Mike Quinones has been wonderful to work with. Absolutely wonderful. We actually are part of a couple of groups together on Facebook where people can share their struggles, share their projects, and share what they're looking for. And we connected up early on, and it's always tricky, finding a good relationship that works with an artist, just because it's like being married. Two people have to be able to complement each other, and not every pairing works. But in this case, he and I chatted about the project. We already had good text ready to go, and we storyboarded it out a little bit. And he came up with a couple of renditions early on that to look through, and I fell in love with them, and Jessie Marie fell in love with Jessie Marie. So we had approval multiple ways on that, and so he will work through the illustrations, then we'll modify them together. We'll tag team that, but it was important for both of us in this project for us to feel connected to the story and the art. So there's parts in the story where the illustrations they feel familiar to people from different areas. With my basis at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, there's elements of that museum that I love. And so some of those elements belong to the museum that our storybook character works in. And another example of that, the Oklahoma City's Science Museum is just a wonderful museum, and they have this fabulous display, it's like nothing I've ever seen before, of oddities and animals and specimens. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that sort of display had to exist with Jessie Marie. And Mike thought, oh my gosh, this is great too. And so you can see elements that would feel familiar as you walk through that exhibit space in Oklahoma. It's not the same thing, but it's got the same feel with the same sorts of species and the same sorts of coloring. And Mike just did a wonderful job of taking real life and then like translating it onto the page into a fiction space. And so I'm so appreciative to be able to work with him on this project.
Excellent. And what would you like readers to take away from your book?
As a teacher, I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, I hope they get something, learn something from this. I hope that they've picked up some piece of information that's useful to them. But the more I read with students and the more I connect with an audience, I really hope that they can enjoy the story and just only enjoy it. Because in my experience, if they can get their brain into flow, or if they can get into that rhythm of just moving along at the pace of the story and enjoying it, learning can happen if it needs to. And if it's not the space for that, it can be purely entertainment. But I want people to be able to just enjoy and be entertained by the stories that I write.
Can't ask for anything more than that.
If I get that far, then I'd be super, super lucky. And
Alan, what other projects are you currently working on?
I actually have a couple of other projects. The one that I mentioned before with on the topic of rocks, there's a second book that will be released in the future about, it connects with insects and bugs. That one I'm really excited about. Benny and the Big Bug Box is a story about a little boy who loves being inquisitive, but sometimes as curiosity kills the cat, he might or might not get in trouble with a giant box of bugs. So working through that one as a story with humor, but that also talks about entomology. Well, that may be overstating it. It doesn't talk about entomology. It uses entomology as a hook to work through our storyline with poor Benny, who has to figure out how to wrangle and rodeo a whole bunch of escaped bugs.
Yeah, that sounds like a really nice story. So, Alan, where can listeners find your book, Jessie Marie's Noisy Museum?
It is available through the website that I have, and that website is worthlearning.org. We live in Fort Worth, and so it was a natural progression to have Worth in the name. We're history buffs, and we love our Fort Worth history. So our website is worthlearning.org, and on that site, people can see, they can keep up with the STEM activities that I'm doing. Our Twitter feed runs through that. They can feel free to steal cool ideas or hit me up for cool ideas that they want to try to roll out. But then also the books are available linked through that site. It's the easiest way. The Science Club Handbook is available directly on Amazon. So that would be one way if somebody wanted to, but it's also linked through the Worth Learning website. So that'd be an easy path if somebody wanted to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, and I do like the way that you've done a play on words there with the Fort Worth and Worth Learning.
I appreciate it. The farther we get away from Fort Worth, the more I have to explain it. But it seems to still work when people hear what's going on.
And by the way, we've got your website linked up on the Creative Writing Magic website and our Twitter feed.
Oh, I really appreciate that. I am totally addicted to Twitter. I love connecting with science lovers and readers on Twitter. So if anybody else likes to tweet, definitely come find me, because I always just like to see what people are doing and help out wherever I can if they're working on something. My Twitter handle is also a Fort Worth signpost. It's at the Fort _FW. When I authored that handle, I was not as interested in the whole world having to copy it down as I am now. If I had it to do over again, I'd have something much simpler. But at the Fort _FW. Of course, if you look up Alan Small, that's connected to that. But
so, Alan, before we close the show, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I would encourage everybody who's listening to let go of the fear or inhibition you have of moving forward on whatever project you're working on. And of course, in my zone, it might be somebody who's thinking of some science thing that they'd like to try. In your listeners right now, fair chance somebody's thinking of a manuscript or working on a literary project. And I would say, don't try to have it all perfectly laid out in your head before you actually start moving on it. Start moving and get after it. And, it'll just only comb itself into place better and better if you can start out with something on the page. So let go of your inhibitions a little bit, try to move forward on it a little bit. There's way too many people out there eager to help out to just let some cool idea sit in the back of your brain unused. So let it out.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. Alan, thanks so much for being a guest on the show.
You are sure welcome. Thanks again for having me.
And thank you, listener. You make this all possible. If you like this podcast, feel free to support us on Patreon and consider subscribing. The link to Patreon is in the description. Also, if you're an aspiring writer and would like to learn more about writing coaching services, contact us on the Creative Writing Magic website. And also, be sure to subscribe to the email newsletter to receive email notifications when new episodes are available. And as always, thanks so much for listening. Stay inquisitive, support the arts, and keep creating. Bye for now.